the worlds. So he's kind of the golden mean of people. So he's someone who can fight, but who also is at home in a diplomatic setting and social settings. Then we have the artist and the philosopher, which of course is a bit more than a general artist or a normal mundane artist and a mundane philosopher. They are they have such deep insights through their art or their learning, in the other case, that they can actually affect the world in a way that would seem magical. So an artist can, through a painting that he does, actually affect changes in the world, and a philosopher usually through things he says.
So what made the team want to do a game set in the Renaissance? Because using existing rules, especially that aren't designed for that time period, it is a lot of work. Because you talked about there's classes you have to cut out, there's races you have to cut out, but then you have to also create things that are going to be balanced into a system. So, what was the catalyst behind you going into the Renaissance?
It's quite easy to get a grip on to why we got back into our role-playing game business. Vortex Polar has published something else before, but I shut down the publishing house years ago. But as we all know, COVID hit, and our main writer, Melina, is, as I told in pre-speech, is a tango teacher. And she was jobless for several years. And my brother always wanted to do something with me. And I had this publishing house for role-playing games before, and he asked, because he knew Melina, all four of us main staff are into role-playing for 30 to 40 years, so quite some time. And Benjamin, my co-publisher, knew that Melina was very good at writing and had the idea, well, why not ask her if she wants to do a project with us? And then we thought about, well, what project? And we asked Melina, and she said she always wanted to have something historical to be in a role-playing game. So first thing which comes to mind is not do it in Dungeons and Dragons, because Dungeons and Dragons is a very limited system for role-playing itself. It's very much statistics, fighting, and everything else. But at the time, we were thinking, well, if you want to do profit, and if you want to get back into the role-playing game market, it's best at the moment to release something for D&D, which was prior to the idea. Well, we talked all about it, that Wizard of the Coast had an idea to somehow change something about D&D. But we are through that. And Melina said, well, she studied Dante, and it was one of her favorite works. And she said she would like to try to somehow rewrite it and fit it into a role-playing game. And this was, and then very fast we asked Andreas if he would join too, to somehow get the gap between more literature and more D&D. So to get somehow into something which works together.
Yeah, there is a really big gap between just writing a story and writing it so that it can be expanded upon and played. And something I've talked to with game designers in the past is they're great at all the little rules and stuff, but some of them really do lack that ability to flesh out the story to draw people in. But then you get writers who are great at writing stuff, but they don't understand how to leave the story open enough to allow people to play in the world.
Maybe just one addition to what Michael said in terms, he made it sound maybe a bit harsher than it was. The idea to use Dungeons and Dragons as the system was because the idea was very quickly to produce something that would look really nice, and therefore, of course, you'd have to have quite expensive and lots of art, and to then make that money back, you have to have a product that is not completely niche. So you can't do it for some niche game and expect people to buy it. So we wanted it for a larger audience, and then D&D was the obvious solution. And actually, it turns out I was quite skeptical of it at first, but it turns out it was actually a great idea because it produced something very, very different and very new, and that it combined these things that normally we would have used a different game for, the historical setting, with the assumptions of Dungeons and Dragons and the races that you usually find in D&D role-playing. And that created something completely different. And I think it was actually for the best.
Nice. I like that you've gone for... Well, I was a history and anthropology major in college, so I'm always excited when I find games that can excite people about possibly doing research on, going deeper into another culture or another period of history.
Yeah, and I mean, here's also there's actually three elements here that are combined in the adventure. There is the Dungeons and Dragons mindset behind it. There's also the historical setting, and then there's the Divine Comedy. So we have poetry in there, and the kind of the search for truth that is part of poetry, and I think that makes for a really powerful mix, I think. And I was a skeptic at the beginning when Melina said she wants to do Dante. I thought this is not going to work, but then I read it and I thought, oh, this actually works. And then I thought, this is actually superb. And it can lead, of course, you have to have, a decent, capable game master. You have to have players who want to go there. I think you can have absolutely powerful role-playing in there because, I mean, imagine yourself in hell and you are confronted with a demon who you want to get past. And the easiest way to do it is to lie to him, to make up some story. But you've just seen what happens to liars in the last ring of hell that you came through. So if that doesn't make you think twice, I don't know what will.
Yeah, and I think using Dante is such a creative idea. When we were talking, go ahead. We were talking about when we looked at it on Monday on stream just before you guys launched, and a lot of people were like, "Ooh, is this Dante?" And I was like, "I don't know yet." And we were looking through the art, and I do want you guys to kind of expand upon where the art and inspiration for some of the art has come from.
Michael, you want to say?
Oh, you do because you got us Mark and
Okay.
so
Yeah. Well, we looked around for artists, and basically Melina found, I think, 6 who she really liked, and one of whom was someone I suggested, which was Mark Smiley, because I'm a great fan of his work. I've been an Artesia Comics fan for a long time, and I think his role-playing game is absolutely brilliant. And not to mention the novels, which are great. 2 of them out, and so he was one of the 6 who got contacted, and 3 got back with yes, we're available. And so these are the three that we thought would be able to convey what we wanted in different ways. And the plan was to have them. I mean, there's no random art in there, so every piece is specifically commissioned to illustrate one part of the background or the story. And different chapters have different artists. So, for example, the Inferno chapter has only the work of Jana Heidersdorf, German artist from Berlin. Another chapter will have only the art of Guinevere Singley from the US. And the background chapters, for example, have the work of Mark Smiley. So, and they each have their own look and the layout. So that's completely embedded. And that was a great thing to be able to do.
Did you guys have any issues? Because I know that you're kind of a interestingly geolocated through Europe, and then you were saying you have artists from Germany, the U.S., and other places. Have you run into any issues being a team working from all over the world?
I don't think at all, because, well, and nowadays, well, as we do now, it's no problem to get into a video call with everyone. And we did this. We had all the artists together, and our layouter and us. So the communication is so easy today. Yeah. I think one of the very few good things about COVID is to learn how to communicate very easy without meeting in person, and doing a company all over the world. Yeah. So. Well, mostly with in daily business it's emails, as we all know, with the illustrators writing back and forth. But we left most of the decision about how the pictures look like to the artists, which may also be something which is a different approach, because I know from our first project, as we did the German version of Unknown Armies, we had very distinct descriptions of all the pictures we wanted in the book. And we left it open in this because all had an understanding of Dante and the Renaissance.
Nice. Yeah, and it is funny how people are much more likely to use a digital platform to have meetings now than they ever were prior. I do have to say, we can always find the good things in something like COVID, because you look at the amount of people that now, I mean, Roll20 more than doubled in size during that time frame. I knew a ton of people that are our ages that hadn't played role-playing games in a long time that now do, because they were like, oh, there's a new way I can do this. I don't have to, because, you come home at the end of a long day. It's tough to go to someone else's house to spend 4 hours playing a game to come back. And they're like, I can sit in front of my computer and game with the people I've won a game with for years. And they're like, I can have a beer while I do it now too, and I don't have to worry about driving home.
Yeah,
and as we're getting older
too. We have a role-playing group from all the girls and guys from school, back in school, our high school time. We meet half a year in person. And we do it with miniatures and everything nowadays. But we found Roll20, and so we are back to playing every 2 weeks, very regularly. and it's a lot of people who enjoy it. And yeah, it couldn't be done differently nowadays. Most of us have kids. We are living very far apart. Our half year get together, and there's someone from Spain always flying in. But you can't do this every 2 weeks. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that thankfully came out of all that, and the ability of companies like yours to be able to create such a cool project, and we've been able to do this for years. It's just now it's a more comfortable thing to do. Somebody's less likely to go, oh well, I don't want to work on that project because I don't want to have to move to another town. It's like, oh no, you can do all the work from home and we'll just have our meetings, as we need them. And you were telling me that your team lives all over Europe, so.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been possible to do this with meetings in person. It's impossible.
Yeah, 20 years ago, this is an impossible project.
It would have been very challenging at the very least.
And
now you can write letters.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I've talked to designers that were working on games back in the 80s where one team was working on the manuscript. They get to a certain point, they get everything printed out, and then mail across. Because what was it? A game called Fringeworthy. The main people that were working on it at one point were in England, and they were working with someone in the U.S., and they were mailing pieces back and forth.
Okay, we're past that.
Yeah. Could you imagine working on a project where that you would have to do that? How do you view an artist's? They take a Polaroid and mail it to you.
Well, it's all just a bit slower.
Yeah.
Not impossible.
No, and that's why I was talking to some of the authors back then. They were like, yes, if we weren't all in the same area, you would take a 6 or an 8 month project and turn it into a 3-year project, which is and understandable at the time. It is amazing how technology has allowed us to do some and. Doing your art research because you wanted something that had that Renaissance feel, that had the also had a feel from Dante's, and there is a bunch of Renaissance era artwork out like that. But how would you have done that in the past? You would have had to gone to galleries or go to a library and research, where all of you were able to do that just through Google.
I do remember that time when there were libraries we had to go to instead of the internet, instead of Wikipedia. You had to read books. Yep.
I still love
Tell
going to
that to the
libraries.
young people, they won't believe you.
Yes. And I remember, so I joke when we have people visit the library, I say we have character sheets for every game ever made. And I'll hold up notebook paper, and there's about a 13-year-old kid who just kind of looks at me, and then his mom goes, honey, that's how we did our character sheets. And he goes, why didn't you just print them out? And she goes, I didn't have a printer. And she goes, and I would have had to have made them or something. And she's like, I didn't even have a computer. And this kid's like, you didn't have a computer? How'd you get on the internet? And she's like, honey, I didn't have the internet. It didn't exist when I was a kid. And this kid's face was like, my mom's older than the internet.
So that's the other talk you have to have with your kids these days.
Yeah. There was a life before cell phones and the internet. What's something that you, Michael, want to bring up specifically about this game?
Well, the first thing I definitely want to bring up is that doing such a new project for D&D was really quite interesting, and having to talk with people about how to get D&D and the real world together, like magic in a religious Italian world. How can you cope with it? How would politicians see it, and everything like this? I think this was the thing I found by far the most interesting about the project. The other thing was researching clothes they wore at the time, and then seeing the details. And I have to definitely name Gwen as the one with her pictures. You find so much. Every time we look at one of her paintings, we see something new which we haven't seen before.
It's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, months after we got the painting, and I don't know, 50 times after we looked at, we find new details.
You find there's a door open, and you notice the door, but now you notice it's open, and then you notice there's a cat looking around the corner. It's ridiculous. Yeah, that's Gwen's work. That's brilliant.
I absolutely love stuff like that when the art just keep. And this is another discussion I always have with game designers, is so many, they'll have a good game and then they skimp on the art, and you know, the old sayings, don't judge a book by the cover, but we all do. I've seen great games not sell because of bad covers and bad art. And then I've seen horrible games that are just beautifully designed and sell because they're just so gorgeous. Art will absolutely sell a game. And looking through what you've shared on the Kickstarter, I love that you didn't just go the kind of cop-out route of just grabbing all the old Renaissance era's paintings to stuff in there. You took those as inspiration to get new work, which allows that really cool, it's a new experience because you're looking at art and you're finding all those little pieces in that art.
Yeah, and that was a very early decision to not put any art from the times which is original into the book, which would have been possible because there's no copyright on them. It's way past any copyright to most of them, but we wanted artists to do artwork for us, so very important for us.
Yeah, and it's the more expensive route to go because you could have gone the safe, cheap route, but it would have made the project feel like you were trying to cheap out.
Yeah, and we will have the same question the next few years with all the AI generating art for us. We will have this question, definitely, especially in role-playing games, because role-playing games with their art are normally more expensive to publish and everything than most other books.
Yeah.
And yes, AI art is a very cheap way to get around it, and we will have to definitely come to a solution to how we will. We'll still have illustrators doing work. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few companies, like Chaosium says they will not use AI art, and then you have like Goodman Games that does Dungeon Crawl Classics, who not only have they've said they won't use it, they don't even use digital art. All of their art is actual like pen and paper drawings or paintings. It has to be in a physical medium for them. And that's, there's some people like, oh, that's crazy. I was like, but that's the direction they want to go. They want to ensure that they get that same feel from the artists that has kind of always been there underlying in gaming. And I love the idea of AI art, but from what I've seen, it just, I don't know, it's missing something that you get from an actual artist. Maybe in 5 or 10 more years, there'll be a little more feeling in it, but it's just not the same.
And that doesn't even touch the ethical questions around it.
Exactly. Yeah, and well, and there's a lot of lawsuits and cases popping up because of well, where are you getting this information to feed your AI? And they're like, oh, they basically let it loose to scrape the internet, and it's like, oh, so you have fed other people's work into your AI to produce new work. Well, all it's doing is copying bits and pieces off of other people's already produced work. Yeah, there's a lot of ethical questions that are going to be coming up in the next few years.
And there are lots of angry artists.
Yes. Well, artists are already angry. We don't feed them enough. My wife's an artist. If let's see, the giant maw on my door. So,
Okay.
but there is so many, and again, just going through your guys' Kickstarter page, there is a ton of great art in it, and I'm excited to get the book in hand. And you guys are close to back, like you guys are only a couple thousand euros off of being funded.
So everyone who's listening, we need to get a little kick on the Kickstarter to get over that line.
Yes.
And then on to the stretch goals, hopefully.
Yes, I always love looking at the cool stretch goals and stuff for everything because there can.
Well, we have more than it shows there, but we decided not to go into unrealistic places right away. Let's see what we get.
I had a friend who did one, and he did stretch goals to like $2 million, and I was like, "Why did you do that?" He goes, the rest of my Kickstarter was silly, so he goes, F it, I knew I was only going to make about $5,000 off it because it was a PDF only thing, and he goes, I just made up the craziest stretch goals. He goes, hey, I was willing to do them if we got to $2 million.
Right.
So, what was each of yours first role-playing game that you played?
I think I can still remember. I'm not sure if that's the same name in English. It's the Black Eye translation. We had an aunt working at a publishing house in Germany, and this was the first German role-playing game, which was due to be shown at a convention, and our aunt asked the producers if she could have an extra copy to give it to me and my brother, and before the convention, so we could test it. She knew we were into fantasy very early, and this was the first thing, and then very soon Dungeons and Dragons followed.
Okay. I can't actually remember the name of the very first game I played because that was at a convention and it was like a 10-page game or something, and it was pretty ridiculous. But then the first proper role-playing game I played was the same, was The Dark Eye, Schwarze Auge. And then I tried D&D, but it didn't really click. Went on to Palladium, Rollmaster, and then when Ars Magica came out, Ars Magica, that was, I'm pretty sure I got the first copy in Europe because I called the guys after I saw the the review in White Wolf, because I knew I wanted to translate this thing into German even before having seen it, and I did. Second edition was translated into German then, and so I was early adopter there, and then I was the earliest adopter actually for Vampire, because I was the first Vampire player. Fun fact.
Vampire was huge in my area in high school.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it was a big thing. I'm very happy that because Renegade Games is now making the 5th edition Vampire, but they just announced they're partnering with the people that have been doing all the Mind's Eye Theater, so they're kind of bringing it all back into because there's 3 companies that make the vampires, all the old White Wolf stuff. Because Renegade makes the core game, and then there was I forget the other company that's making the stuff that came out in the 2000s. I forget that setting, and then you had the company that picked up all the Mind's Eye Theater stuff.
Onyx Path, isn't it?
Yes, Onyx. Yeah, Onyx Path is making the other. Yeah. So it's slowly coming back into one publisher covering everything.
Okay.
I need to get a hold of I need to get a hold of German specific games for the library. We have games from all over the world. In fact, I don't know if you know the game Cult from Sweden.
Sure.
Somebody from Sweden just mailed us all the 1st edition Cult stuff in the little boxes, and I'll bring those to events, and people are like, oh, what's this? Like, oh, hey, I've played this, and then we have the Steve Jackson games, because Steve Jackson Games actually did all the work to bring it to the U.S., and we have the first U.S. versions. And people have played that, and they pick it up, and they're like, I have no clue what this says.
There has been a German version of Code. I think there's now another German version of the newest Code coming out, or out already, I don't know.
Yeah, well, Modifius, I believe, Modifius, like 3-4 years ago, made a new edition of Cult, and I think they're getting ready to work on a new edition, or going to be releasing a new edition or something. I remember reading something, so there's going to be a 5th or 6th edition of Cult soon.
Yeah, okay. And yet another system then.
Yeah. They're probably going to convert it into their 2D20 system because being Modifius. And the nice thing, I like it when companies get a good system that they can make it easy for gamers to move between systems. Things like Free League has their Year Zero, Modifius has their 2D20 system, even Artel Saurian, because Witcher and Cyberpunk Red have the same core rules. So if you play one, you can jump into the other.
So even if it doesn't have to do anything with our project at the moment, do you want at least a little bit water-damaged copy of the German version of Unknown Armies?
Yes, we'll take anything. I love having stuff in foreign languages. Steve Jackson Games, because they were the first company to put a role-playing game into Brazil, which is a very large company, and Steve Jackson had gone down there and saw that there was no role-playing games down there, so he brought in GURPS in Portuguese down there. And when they sent us a bunch of books about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a Portuguese copy of GURPS in there, and I hadn't even taken the wrapping off it. I just threw it on the shelf because we got it the morning that we were going to an event, and I just threw all the stuff on the shelf, and this guy comes through and was just so excited to see a Portuguese copy of GURPS. And I asked him, and he goes, oh, everybody in Brazil, because he was from Brazil. He's like, everybody down there has played GURPS. Like, this is where we get our start. So I always love having foreign language stuff on the shelves because we get visitors. When we go to big events, we get visitors from all over, and it's great to see people light up. And then they'll share stories about their gaming from where they grew up.
So I'll send you a copy. I still have some.
Well, awesome. So, and both of you have a nice, varied history of role-playing games, which is really cool. I technically started with first edition D&D, AD&D. My brother and I bought the player's handbook, got home, and then discovered that not all the rules were there. and my family had a comic book store, so we tried to play it for a little while, and then somebody that was coming to the comic book store played Champions, so we got into that, and then we got into Palladium, we got into everything else. So I didn't get back into D&D until 2nd edition, when I was in high school and people in my school paid me to. They kept bringing me books. They would pay me by book to keep being the GM.
Yeah, we were quite lucky because we had a very early comic and then role-playing game store in Munich. Very early for the times. Someone, an old fellow who was always eyeing every customer who came in and sorting out if he just in to ask any directions or everything. He was a little Scrooge McDuck, but he was wonderful to talk to because he was so interested in everything. And as we talked before, there was no internet, so he talked to so many people in every company. He sometimes phoned them to ask if something new would be coming. It was ridiculous for the times in Germany, but so good for us to have them because it was our product. It was our niche we loved. And well, somehow we found people who enjoyed it as much as we did, quite fast.
Well, that's awesome.
With the corner.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we had a comic and role playing shop in Saarbrücken too, which is not very superbly large city. About 100,000 people, 120,000 or so kind of in between there. But we at some point got a role-playing and comic shop, and then of course we immediately colonized it and set up a role-playing club in there. So I tried to always introduce new games there, so bring them a new game and play it immediately with a few guys. So it was quite interesting. So lots of games got being played there, and that was also kind of pre-internet, of course. So people didn't know all that stuff so well.
Yeah, I remember before the Satanic Panic happened, my family we had a store, and I was a little kid, but I remember my dad told me, he was like, we couldn't get D&D in the early '80s because we were told, oh, there's no crossover between role-playing games and comic books, and it was funny because it went to the toy departments of big department stores and the toy stores and hobby stores. So you could buy D&D and remote controlled airplanes in the same store, but you couldn't buy comic books and D&D because the distributors didn't think there was a crossover.
Okay, that's weird. No, here it was usually comic books, and then had a little corner for role-playing games.
Yep. Well, after the early '80s Satanic Panic happened and Sears and Toys R Us, all those stores were like, oh, nope, get this out of here. They started calling all the comic book shops like, do you want to carry this? So it was funny being told, no, there's no crossover, to, hey, could you please buy some? And if you look, all through the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s, most of the places you would buy role-playing games were at comic book stores or a standard bookstore. But the standard bookstore didn't have the cool stuff to go along with it.
I think the comic book stores often got badgered or bullied into getting that stuff by the role players.
So, some of them did, absolutely. I know a number of comic book store owners in the 90s that they hated having them, but in the early 90s there was comic book industry was having problems, and role-playing games kind of carried them through that. And then as comic book industry was kind of correcting is when the role-playing industry took a dive, and they were like, the role-playing games were there for a bad time for comic book stores. and help some of them get through it, thankfully. So this is a source book and an adventure and kind of a core rules book, the Straightway Lost, and you're using Dante's Inferno as your inspiration. Is there a way forward to use? What's next after this?
That's a music art.
No. At the moment, there are ideas for where we're going after. We as we started this project at Warsaw, we will make this project and not do anything more. It's just a project. But well, you know how it is. While we are working at this, and you get so many more ideas, and you think about well, what will happen afterwards. First off, in the book itself, there are a lot of ideas to go on after the main story of the Straightway Lost. So that you could stay in the Italian Renaissance and develop the characters into something different and to tackle other problems. So for everyone who is game mastering, it won't be a problem to continue the story after this. But as we designed most of it into something which we ourselves thought could be interesting to go on. Well, for example, all the character classes we designed are not only for the level from 3 to 8, which is the adventure, but well, as it should be from level 1 to 20 in Dungeons and Dragons. So the first idea was going on after the Straightway Lost ended, and then stay in the same time period. My brother and me are thinking a little bit different, because the idea of Melina taking on one time period might be interesting to do other time periods, which are other historical settings, which could also be made into Dungeons and Dragons. So that's one of the ideas. And the other one my brother and I have is, my brother is well, I told you before, we have a group of the people we played with in school, and he developed the world way back, and it grew very big, and he's thinking about doing a more classical approach to D&D, so a fantasy setting, and giving birth to his world he designed. So we are quite sure that Vortex Publishing isn't shutting down after this project, but there will be more.
But just latching on to what Michael said there, there are numerous hooks throughout the book, throughout the story, and throughout the background part of it, the source book part of it, that make it almost inevitable that people might, if they enjoy the adventure, might want to go on and make a campaign out of it. For example, the powers that the philosopher and the artist have, the high-level powers, are directly integrated into the setting and what we envisioned might be happening in the future, like years after the events in the adventure. So that's already geared towards that and towards the cosmology, which has a lot to do with the fairy, or the fae, as we call them. So it's already seeded in there. Plus, there are, as Michael said, there are a bunch of suggestions at the end of what you could do with what happened there and carry on. So there's a lot to do. I think it's easy to carry on with that.
And maybe to add something more for the project at the moment, the core book is more or less written. Andreas said before, we are doing a Kickstarter. There are stretch goals. So there will be some more parts for the characters written if we reach some of the stretch goals. Andreas is thinking about a small adventure to get the heroes from level 1 to level 3, where we would like to start. So this would be covered, and more ideas if we go further to maybe. But to edit, all of this would be published as PDF only, because we wanted to be sure to be to not be too problematic to produce anything more after the Kickstarter. We did a different approach to most Kickstarters in having the product more or less ready when the Kickstarter starts. So all of the backers could be sure to get the book in the end, and to just add anything more. We know another book is always nice to have, but for everything else, it's okay.
Yeah, it would have been too frightening not to have everything finished and started.
Oh, you have no clue how happy that makes me to hear, because dealing with game designers, I've had emails like, "Hey, could you take a look through this?" Because people will send me things to look over before they start their Kickstarter, or they just want someone that's not looked at it or played it with them to take a look at it. And I've had people send me basically a list of notes, and they're like, "Oh, we're getting ready to go to Kickstarter." I was like, "You don't have a game yet."
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, "Oh, it'll only take like 6 months. As soon as the Kickstarter's going, we're gonna knock it out." And I'm like, "Oh, oh no, that's not how any of this works."
No.
And
I mean, I would panic if I had to work on this.
Well, that's why I tell like creative people, I was like, you need grounded business people to work with you as well. Someone that can help you with the logistics, the all the behind the scenes stuff, because most of the artists and designers I've worked with, their concepts of time are horrible. Their concepts of money are horrible, because they finish a Kickstarter and they're like, "Oh wow, shipping was way more than I thought it would be." And it's like, well, did you actually go get quotes, or like, no, I just kind of rough guessed off of what I get when I wrote a book, and I'm just like, oh.
Okay, no. It's all done. It's all done. I mean, the thing is in final proofreading now. So that means the layout is done. Of course, there will be tweaks, and I'm currently looking at. I'm still looking at stuff, at mechanics or so, and thinking, could that be simpler in any way? And then I'll probably go and shock Melina at some point when I say, maybe we should change this. And she'll, no, it's over.
We're a little behind the we could change that line.
But, it's not in print yet, so we could say no. But it's done. So it's not more or less written. It's written, and so let's not frighten the horses.
Yeah, I love hearing that, and it also makes backers much. You get people that are more willing to back projects.
You know that you don't have to wait for 3 years for the product.
Yeah, or never see it at all.
Can't hear you, David.
Oh, did you lose me?
Yeah. And video is also frozen.
Oh.
Andreas, can you still hear me?
Ja, ich sehe dich, ich höre dich.
So we will continue. Maybe the viewers are still hearing that, and we'll see if he comes back. As we talked about things we will do after the project. Yeah, thanks. We got the notice that we're still live. Something we haven't talked about at all in this video call is there will be the complete adventure will be on Roll20. So we talked to the Roll20 guys and wanted to make the complete adventure on Roll20. This is something we will work on after Kickstarter, because we didn't want to do it while we were doing the Kickstarter. Well, we are all nervous. It's our first Kickstarter, and we're not sleeping too good, especially in the early days of the Kickstarter. At the moment, it's getting much better as we are near the plateau to go for our first pledge.
So the Roll20 stuff might take a while, but
yeah. So there we will see. Roll20 said they will do the whole thing, but we don't know exactly why.
Okay, David, I can see you again.
Okay, can you hear me though?
But I can't hear you.
Awesome.
Maybe I should talk some more about the beginning of the adventure, where we start in Florence. As we were talking about before, about magic in a world where magic normally shouldn't be or is not seen too good from, well, most of the religions. Having to play a magician in our adventure is possible, but especially in the first and maybe the last part of the adventure, it's not your advice to do most of the flashy spells like a fancy fireball or anything like this, because the church will very fast tell you that's not the way it's supposed to be in our world.
How come the pitchforks?
Yeah, they come after you like being a Jedi in the original series.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back. Hello.
And
of course.
and to be more clear about it, that's why we also only took some of the races and did some more races, or like we like to call them nowadays, species. I think D&D is also doing a rework about the term of races. To be non-human in this adventure is to hide into society. Because believing into something like paganism, like this, in Florence isn't something which is very good. So having the tieflings Andreas mentioned before, with a tail in the use and something like this, it's something you have to hide in society. Yeah. It doesn't matter. You can't be of a fighter from the guard or an artist or anything, but you have to come back with more of a background story. And even to
So
make it more easy for as D&D isn't it's not so much into role playing. Andreas wrote something about how they can fit into the society and some tables how the group fits together, does know it, does know everyone, and does do know some people in Florence to get the group together, which we all know. Everyone who did game mastering at some time had people meet up in a pub with a stranger sitting in the background, a hooded figure. This is a story. We all started like this. We wanted to be more easy to get into a group cohesion and a cohesion into the Florentine society.
that was very important to us because there were some things happening there because the characters are thrown into adventure at level 3, and so there must be some backstory to them, and then they have to very quickly decide that they want to form a group and to go on some ridiculously harebrained adventure together. So having each other's backs and all that. So I thought we need to do something there, and that shouldn't be just left to the game master, because it's easy to underestimate. Yeah, as someone famously said, to underestimate the difficulty of or the way the characters might behave. So I came up with 3 things mainly. That is, and that's called first the hooks for character motivation. So what motivates each character? And there's a simple table, so you just roll 1d6, or you pick something which tells you why would you even want to go on an adventure in any way. Why not just go work in your bank? It's because maybe your family has an interest in you finding something out or helping someone, and that gets you into the adventure. Then there's commonalities. So a very simple thing, everyone rolls 1d6. Every player rolls 1d6, and everyone who rolled, let's say, 2 has something in common. One thing in common. So it might be a family member. It might be that one's brother is married to the other guy's cousin. And if usually with one roll you have the group already interconnected, sometimes you might need 2, and the game master can just decide what he wants to do, or people can pick from the table. So you have already a group that is motivated individually and that is somehow interconnected already. So when they sit in the tavern, which is in this case in our adventure a party, a big social event, they will automatically kind of form a group because they have something in common. So they meet all these strangers and they find, oh, you're married to my sister's cousin, aren't you? Yes. And immediately you have a bit of group cohesion. And the third thing that we have is called motivational drives. And that is something you might find in horror games usually, which is something that allows the player to put something forth to stop himself from saying, my character wouldn't do this. The famous thing where you say, oh, I would like to go on this adventure, but my character is far too careful to do this. So you've got something that you can use where you say, normally I think I wouldn't do this, but I have this thing where the thought of finding something out, getting closer to the truth about something, is something that gets my character motivated. And in return, he gets an inspiration point. So he gets this 1d20 that is normally given in D&D for good role-playing as a reward. So he gets that. So that will get your people, hopefully, through these decisions where they say, no, we don't want to do this. And then we have, of course, the dismay mechanic, which is a kind of a sanity mechanic. As hell is involved, you could imagine that might make sense. I think that's most of the new character creation and gameplay mechanics that are new that we're using. So we're not using, or we're suggesting not to use the ideals, flaws, and what is it? The third thing
Bonds.
Bonds that is usually used. You can if you want, but we suggest not to overdo it, and so just use these things. And I forgot of course, the good deed, the memory, and the dark secret. So this is something that will come up in play, which also generates character background. So you have to think of something that you did, which makes you feel really shitty about yourself, the dark secret. You get to think about something that you did that you're proud of, some good deed, and you get to think of some happy memory that you had maybe in your childhood or whatever. And all these things create character background very rapidly and easily. So you get to start play hopefully with pretty well run.
There's some cool stuff in there, and anytime you can have a simple chart or table that helps a GM, I love that stuff. Because
I'm a great Kevin Crawford fan, so all the tables.
Yeah, and some people, too many charts and tables run people away. But when you can have something that assists the GM to get the game moving, or help them when the players the players paint the GM into a corner. I've been there a couple times, and you got to think fast on your feet, because you're like, okay, we're going this way, everything's going good, and then all of a sudden everybody at the table all decides to turn left. I'm like, there's not even a path down there. Where are you guys going? We're making a hole in the wall. We're doing it. Well, and something I think really cool is because the time period that you've chosen, the 15th century or 13th century, is really cool, because you have the church has a great amount of power. So adventures can be based around church edicts. Family is huge. So you have a lot of the ability to use families to direct adventures. And then Italy and Germany weren't nations at the time, because you had the Holy Roman Empire, and then all the little Italian city-states that were enormously powerful for how little land they actually controlled. So, Florence, Milan, they had money, exactly. Venice was immensely wealthy. So was Milan and Florence. And you had these small city-states that were just immensely powerful through that era. And it's just, if you know a little history, it gives you a lot of leeway to kind of push adventures, or give excuses to do adventures.
Yeah. So you might have each of the characters in the group working for someone, unbeknownst to everyone else.
Yes. They could be the number 2 family in Milan and the number 3 family in Florence, and they're all being directed by the church to do this, but each backing group wants their adventurer to do something a little different, or they have to find a little more information, or a different relic, or they want that thing that gives them the edge.
Yeah, and you have a lot of factors in there, like status and money. Mm-hmm. And I mean, status now, as opposed to the Middle Ages, is far more fluid already.
Oh yes,
can quickly get up the ladder. I mean, the Sforza family went from farmers to leaders of Milan within one generation, and you can make a lot of money very quickly, because the rise of the Italian banks and some of the merchant houses there, and so that's all very important now, and can be a good hook for anything, right?
Yeah, it's amazing once merchants were allowed to have some sort of status, how it changed everything.
And it's the rise of humanism, so the individual is getting much more important than it was
Yes.
in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, because you look in the Middle Ages, merchants they could gather wealth, but they had no real influence. And with the birth of Renaissance, and we still see a lot of effects of the Renaissance period today. Because I mean, Bill Gates grew up from a well-off family. You know, his parents were lawyers, but they weren't wealthy like he is. You know, you and look how much influence he has on the world today, and it was because of the Renaissance that you know, men like that could have the power that they do. You know, with well, I mean, moreover, I mean, Bill Gates is just a modern merchant selling software.
Yeah, and in the game you can meet people like the Bill Gateses of the time. I mean, the super rich people live in Florence and in the other cities, and in such a small town you will meet them. And
Yeah.
And the supposition also is that the characters are not lower class usually. They're coming from halfway good families, not necessarily the upper class, but they can. So they will have access there very quickly.
And it might also be interesting for the people who are playing the game, as Melina wrote very much about it. In hell, purgatory, and heaven, you do meet people which have died at some time, which might have been interesting or interesting for the group. As the player, so options to family members and something like this, and to get to talk to people from former times, or get around people from former times who are in hell at the moment and have no way of getting out of it. So there's also an aspect because we had some people asking, this is not the period where Dante lived, where we wrote the game, but it's way after, because it's about what Dante wrote, and there might be a place somewhere on their journey where they might meet Dante.
Well, it's a perfect time period because you know, probably one of the most controversial popes served during that time, because it's Pope Alexander, the Borgias, which had a large amount of power through not only the Italian states but Spain and the like. And then it's also the start of exploration to outside of Europe and Asia and Africa.
Yeah, it's 1492.
Yep.
That's when it starts.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Okay.
That was the when I was a little kid. That was my teachers. It was I think every American kid growing up, all the way somewhere in the 90s. They may have stopped, but it was in 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So, and because it rhymes so well, you know, here I am in my mid 40s, and I still remember that. You know, I was taught that in like second or third grade.
In German, we call it a donkey bridge.
A donkey bridge.
Yeah.
So, remember that.
I like that.
I don't know why.
I always love learning interesting expressions from other countries because and it's funny because sometimes nobody knows they had a reason why it was said, and then it's just stuck and no one knows why anymore. The British are full of them. They have a bazillion of them, and you can usually find out where they came from, and it's a longer journey to figure out where it came from.
But in English, it always ends up with Shakespeare. In German, it's always good. In German, it's always good. In English, it's always Shakespeare. That's just how it is.
My favorite story is still a Shakespearean story. Hamlet is my favorite story ever written. So,
Great.
I may or may not have used a lot of Hamlet bits in my GM campaigns over the years. So,
Okay. Yeah, I'm more a Macbeth guy.
see, Macbeth is to me was always just it was a guy that had no spine and was driven by everybody else.
Yeah.
Hamlet, the thing I always loved about Hamlet was if you go watch it as a play, it really depends on the people in the play, whether Hamlet is sane or crazy or starts sane and goes crazy. The characters really are dependent upon the people playing them. And then if you're just reading it, your mood can really alter how you see the characters, and that's what I always loved about Hamlet. It was super dependent upon the actors or the reader, whereas most of his other plays, if you know that he loves to do, because one thing I always liked about Shakespeare was he wrote lines that would react one way with one part of society and react another way with a different part of society. And like knowing that and trying to figure that out, see where they were, and then seeing how those are played out by different people in the actual plays.
Yeah, but the thing with Hamlet is that it just the variety of takes you can see on the typical Hamlet monologues. I mean, you just go on YouTube and watch all the best British actors do Hamlet, and it's just all completely different. There's no standard take on it, and that makes it interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why, because I like most of Shakespeare's plays. A lot of classical writing is very influential to me, just because if somebody wrote something that was good enough to actually be turned into a book, it was a big deal for a very long time. And now you can go on Amazon and see all the books that are self-published, and you're like, ooh. Can we go back to a hand-done printing press? Because I'll be honest, I love reading through some of those really, really bad books. And just like, yep, you absolutely self-published this, and I understand why. And I'm happy you did, because you got your product into the world. Let's see. Well, we've been going for a little over an hour. Is there anything that you would like to talk about before we wrap this up, so you guys can get some sleep?
Two things we haven't talked about, I think. Is one thing to know is that the Fae, or fairy, or Fae, we want to call them, play a very significant role in the adventure, in the cosmology. So they're there in the background, and at the beginning, no one knows that they're even there. And then it turns out they're instrumental to everything that happens.
Okay.
And let's just say they messed things up big time, and now they're trying to fix it. And they do that in their own mysterious ways. And you can meet some of them. That's the one thing. The other thing is, and Michael, maybe you have other ideas of what we've missed. The second thing is warlocks. We did a little bit of tweaking with the warlocks. So we threw out the old ones as a patron class and brought in the titans. And that ties in with the backstory of the dwarves. And so you can have titan packed warlocks, and each warlock we provided the options for specific patrons, so you're not just picking a titan warlock or so, but you pick a specific titan as your patron, so you're a warlock polus then. or if from the Fae you also pick one of the Fae lords that you can be a warlock of. So you're a warlock of the Bone Maiden or something. And then you also get one specific invocation that is exclusive to you that you can pick as one of your invocations when you're, I think, 7. Yeah, that was worth mentioning, I thought.
So
I have one thing too.
Oh, go ahead.
As I'm the one who is doing the building for our role-playing games with a lot of miniatures and something like. We have some miniatures for this Kickstarter too as an add-on, and they're made by the company the printing ever goes on from Poland, and they are specifically designed for this adventure. It's like Cerberus, the three-headed dog, and the monks like Savonarola and we had some critic about it because most people say they're quite costly. And I would like to add, I know that there are a little bit more than the regular miniatures from printing companies who are designing them themselves. We can't do this. We are no 3D design expert for miniatures. So we had to raise the price at least a little bit to the standard miniatures. There will be more if we get a little bit higher in the stretch goals. So we can't we can't tell you you will get more, but if enough people do get into the Kickstarter, there might be options.
Just pledge more, then there will be more.
Yeah.
And there will be some shown in the updates on the Kickstarter campaign page. So I think we have one already in the updates, one painted miniature there, and I think there will be more. So we can have a look there. So I think they look great. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at the miniatures that you have on the Kickstarter now, and it says if they're chosen separately, it's €20, and that's for 8 miniatures, and 3 of them look like they're good size. So that's not too bad.
It's not too bad. I do a lot with miniatures and know a lot about miniature painting. I know 8 miniatures would be normally, if they're not made in house, around $16 or something, or euros, which is a little bit more. It's just, if we do get critic, we like to answer them, and we'd like to answer them before.
No, that makes sense.
Also, they're specific to the adventure. So you have, for example, Savonarola in there, and all these creatures appear in the adventure. So it makes sense to,
And you will need maps as well. Mark is doing the maps at the moment. Melina was on a fair last week, and she printed out the first map and took the non-painted miniatures with her to show them around. We also have to mention the last thing, some audio for the different regions, and it's also by someone called by Tabletop Audio. He's doing a lot, and we are very lucky to get him to work on this.
Yeah, I love being able to have background music that's not distracting, because especially with something like this, if you can get something that matches your setting, but isn't well-known music or distracting sounds, because that's always a problem when you sit down to play, a sci-fi game and you throw on Star Wars and stuff like that, and people end up paying attention to the music because it's music they know and they like, and it becomes a distraction instead of a bed. Whereas if you get somebody that's really talented, they can create something that's very good that adds atmosphere but isn't distracting. And that's harder than people think.
It is. Huh?
And by the way, music does play quite a role anyway in the adventure. There are several points where it's pointed out that at this point you might want to play a specific hymn from, some stuff that is already out there that you can easily find and can play if you like, instead of just describing what people sing. So, chorals, hymns.
Yeah, and oh man, it's great that you put little notes like that in, because it is hard to describe music. I don't care how many music critics out there that think they can do it. It's much easier to play it for someone and let that feeling come through. Yeah,
and the music is there. I mean, there is. Yeah. You can say they are singing this actually. They are singing the Miserere Dei, and you can find the Miserere Dei and on YouTube or Spotify or wherever and play it. So that's not a problem.
Yeah, might be also interesting to add. Melina did a lot of research and put together a list about interesting literature for the time period, for music, and it will all be in the appendix of the book. So if people want to know more and are not so much into the history of the times, it's very easy with this list to get into the time period.
I'm loving it. And are you guys going to call that Appendix N? So those that are listening, if you don't know what Appendix N, in the first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, there was the Appendix N. It was suggested reading, and they're all great books. And it's funny because if you know Goodman Games, it makes Dungeon Crawl Classics. They actually read all the books on Appendix N, and they made Dungeon Crawl Classics using those books, which I thought was cool. So anytime anybody wants to add books, a list of books that'll help understand the setting better or be a better game master or player, I always kind of ask, are you going to name it Appendix N? Because that was the first book that had that list of, hey, check these out to understand how to play better.
There are still Reddit discussions about it.
Yes.
To this day.
Well, and I tell most people, I was like, if you can find a copy of the original Dungeon Master's Guide, it's a tough read because Gary Gygax had his own way of laying things out. But there's so much great advice in that book for being a GM, and that Appendix N is a great list of books to understand fantasy settings. And you guys are mixing real world with fantasy, and Dante's Inferno may not be a great read for everyone. I have my niece's husband. He started reading Dante's Inferno while he was deployed to Iraq, and not a good place to start reading Dante's Inferno. In the middle of getting shot at and getting rocket and mortared, and it actually, he admits that his PTSD was probably worse because of what he was. He was like, oh, I'm gonna be a grown up and read grown up books now, and just happened to choose the worst book to start with in that situation.
Go read Dragonlance.
Yeah, exactly. But what are some of the books that you have on there? Because you said you're gonna suggest music and books and stuff from that time period. Do you know some of the stuff that might be on there?
One I know is on there is the Duchess of Milan, which is also what I always think about first when to get a bit of the vibe. It's an entertaining book. It's well written, and it's really good, and it gives you a lot of ideas about how living in that time was. There's, of course, I think there's more than one television series called The Medici.
Yeah, there's
just a few years back, which was, I think, okay.
Yeah, there was two. One was HBO and one I forget who did the other one, but yeah, two shows on the Borgia, and I think they're both really good. I think they definitely over dramatize some of the stuff, but they did a really good job if you look at like all the background stuff to see how the world is going beyond just the crazy drama of the Borgia.
Yeah, and it's an entertaining way to get a feel for the world. And then there's of course Jakob Burckhardt, Civilization of the Renaissance in Italy, which everybody should have read, because for a non-fiction book, it's hugely entertaining.
Yes,
Hugely entertaining. It's brilliant.
It's a fascinating period, and again, I love talking to people here in the U.S. and remind them that Germany as a country and Italy as a country are far younger than the United States as a country, because so many people don't realize that that both of those, as we know them as nations today, formed much more recent in history, because they were the Holy Roman Empire was just a big, massive, crazy city states. It all I love going over how the political system within the Holy Roman Empire. It was a fascinating period of time, and it's so funny how little knowledge most people, probably in the world, have of how both Italy and Germany were for a huge portion of their histories before they became unified nations.
Yeah, the idea of being German is relatively young.
Yeah, you were Germanic, but you were, or you may there was a million different terms to think about, but you weren't German. You were, Bavarian, or and even Bavaria has in itself has an interesting history of being broken up, being controlled by different nations or kingdoms. Yeah. Exactly. Again, big history and anthropology nerd, so I could go on about that stuff for a while.
And I mean, the Italy in that time was really so fragmented, but it also makes it interesting. I mean, you can have Siena is not far from Florence, but they were mortal enemies from us most of the time, and we're always at each other's throats. And sometimes you're surprised when you go to Siena. You can't imagine that this was ever a real power in Italy. It's just it's just a village, not much more than a village. Well, it's a town. People from Siena, sorry, but it's really small. And to imagine that they were that powerful. I mean, Venice was a world power.
Yeah.
With, and you can walk across it in I don't know.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to, especially. I mean, so many of the coastal city-states in Italy, the power they had, and it's just it's mind-boggling to think, because you look at them now and you see how tiny they are now, and they their city-state wasn't much bigger.
Yeah. But they had the condottieres, so they just paid for their armies.
Yeah.
And there were lots of people willing to do the job.
Absolutely. Do you want to live in the same little village for your entire life, or do you want to go attempt to make some coin being a mercenary?
Yeah. And a lot of Englishmen were there fighting as mercenaries.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if you're like, well, I can go overseas and make a lifetime's amount of funds being a soldier for 3, 4, 5 years. If I live,
especially if you can't not be at war for the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and exactly, because a lot of people, a lot of nations didn't keep standing armies, so they'd go to war. They'd raise an army, and then the war is done after 5, 6 years. Well, what do? Do you have a farm to go back to? Or are you just going to go back and sit in the streets and with nothing to do? Or now you're in your late 20s who's going to take you as an apprentice?
Yeah, but there's loads of money in Italy to be made. So
Yes, and so go to Italy and become a pikeman.
yeah.
And that's the thing. Everybody thinks everybody ran around with swords. The number one weapon was spears and pikes.
So always the polearms.
Yep. And so Gary Gygax put 400 of them in all of his books, and he was like 4 swords. You get the short sword, long sword, bastard sword, and a claymore. There you go. That's all you need. But here's all the different pikes and polearms there ever were.
But they're a bitch to carry around. So
Yes. Well, it has been awesome chatting with you too, and we're gonna keep a good eye on this Kickstarter. Want you guys to do well. Really excited just because it is, like I said, it's something that's definitely out of the norm of what's being created right now, and I'm excited to get it in people's hands. Again, the history anthropology nerd for me, anytime that we can get something that might get people excited into studying history, always gets me excited. It gets me happy.
there's lots of history in the source book. So
Good.
all kinds of stuff about life in the Renaissance.
Well, and both of you have my contact info, so if you ever need somebody, just next set of eyes on a project in the future to look at, I will be happy to take a look, and we will spread the word about the game as much as we can.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Thank you very
Well,
much
it
for
was-
your... Oh, go ahead.
No, it was fun doing this. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and everybody at home. It looks like it is time for the library to close. We got to let these gentlemen get to bed. They are in Europe, so on an entirely different time zone, and I got to go mow my lawn because it's now getting close to 1 o'clock in the afternoon here. So thank you all for tuning in, and the library is now closed.